Hi, I'm Chris Elsbree, and I'm here with Cyndy Sheldon on January 2nd, 2021. And Cyndy, you're going to talk with us today about egalitarian relationships.
Right.
All right. Well, I'm all ears.
Okay. And this is the third session we've done. The first two were titled The Egalitarian Influence in Gestalt Therapy. And this is my attempt to take it a little further than how Fritz really opened up this theme and focusing mostly on egalitarian relationships. I want to say a couple of things to you, Chris, because you had asked me in the previous interviews what kind of background I had, and I forgot to mention a couple of really important things. One of which is I had 6 years of Reichian therapy training, as well as personal work. That was a long time, but it was wonderful. I got to express myself once a week. And it was the same teacher that was in LA working with a lot of Gestalt trainers as well as San Francisco, Philip Curcarudo.
Uh-huh.
And Judith worked with him also. So I had all that. And then I had a number of years of training with a couple who ran the Family Therapy Institute of Marin County. And they had been trained by Virginia Satir. So I had a lot of background in the Virginia Satir approach to couples and families and was on their staff. They actually hired me because I was a Gestalt therapist and they liked Fritz. So I've had, those are the two main difference in addition to my Navajo background. But I want to start out mostly today by sort of painting this picture of hierarchy that we've all grown up in. And I mentioned this last time briefly. But if you look at how most people, at least in the US culture and maybe other cultures as well, you know, we all start out as infants and we have a parent or somebody behaving as a parent. So that's that hierarchy. And then we graduate to a student and with a teacher for many years. And then we go possibly become an employee with an employer. So that whole hierarchy is just embedded in the system of us and each little being. And then as we get older, everything shifts. We become the parent, we become the teacher, and we become the employer. So that most of people's lives are connected with some kind of hierarchy or other. And when I've done a lot of workshops just on egalitarian relationships, and I ask my students, like, have you ever been in a situation that was not hierarchical? And very few can think of anything except friendships. That's about the only thing they come up with. I fortunately had a very different experience. I was raised as a Quaker, and in the Quaker tradition, there's this whole concept of consensus. So I got that at a fairly early age. And then somehow in social work school, they supported a lot of egalitarian principles. You probably had that too.
Yeah.
And then in the Gestalt Institute of San Francisco, we decided to become a cooperative, not a hierarchical organization, which meant that we had about 10 trainers and we didn't pass or fail people. We just gave them certificates of attendance. We got out of the business of judging them. And which I had forgotten to mention last time, but that was an important thing. So given the fact that people are more used to hierarchy than non-hierarchy, it's understandable that they would probably try to create their relationships in a hierarchical way as well, or assume that that's how it's supposed to be. But more and more, the younger generation is coming in and saying, we're both equal. And I think that a lot of the gay couples have really also paved the way for egalitarian relationships, at least more recently, maybe not in the old days, but in terms of them really acknowledging each other as an equal and moving forward in their lives together. So I have made a list of a lot of the kinds of things that couples struggle with, and I'm going to read some of these off and just cover the basics. These items were created in part by myself, but also some of my students who during a workshop would add things to the list that they hadn't thought about or I hadn't thought about. Some of them I'm going to spend a little more time on, but I thought it'd be fun just to give you an idea. First of all, Virginia Satir, a famous family therapist, she used to talk about a couple as being the architects of the family system. They're usually the ones that pay the rent or own the house, pay the house mortgage or whatever. So they're like the owners of the business. And I use the word business. I don't know that she used that word, but I use the word because in many ways, two people running a household, it's like a business. They have to deal with payments, they have to deal with how to make things work and so forth and so on within the group, however many there are. So if you look at it's just the two people who are the co-owners or the people running this business that have the equal relationship. The rest of them, not necessarily, depends on the age and so forth and so on. And these two people, all they have to do is agree. They don't have to have everything divided equally. It's impossible to do that. So they just have to agree on each of these items. So let me just run through some of these. Finances, that has to be dealt with. Healthcare, are both people on the same healthcare plan or is one not at all and the other part of one? Private space, this is one that doesn't get much attention usually because there are a lot of homes and apartments that aren't big enough, but often two people want some private space. And so they want a room to themselves. They can go study or they can meditate or have friends over or whatever. And so this is a growing issue. And I'm going to run through some of these a little quicker. Housemates, whether you have other people living there, not as co-owners of the business, but of just living there and paying rent. Then the issue of house rules. Are there any rules about not taking drugs or turning the lights out at night or whatever? Jobs. Is one person's job far away? Do they have to drive? And are they gone from home longer than the other? All issues around food, issues around drugs and alcohol, technology, who's in charge of the vehicles, pets. And then there are issues if you have children or elders living there, the care of them. Religion and spirituality, political orientation, sensuality and sexuality, core beliefs, issues around how to deal with mechanical equipment, like old people like me can't deal with technology very well, cell phones and so forth. Vacations, that's a big one. Do people take private vacations ever? Or is it only together? How about holidays and birthdays? And the whole issue around gifts, which is a huge issue in many households. Then the whole issue of family business meetings, if necessary, creating at least once a month a time to sit down, make sure that everybody's dealing with the same issues and everything is working as well as can be. So some other things that I've added are, is the couple, are they flexible or quite rigid? Are they able to hear and give feedback to each other in a non-judgmental way? Now, one thing I just left out is that the items in the family that are not negotiable, such as lots of times an older man will marry a younger woman and he's already had children and he doesn't want any more, she does. And so that might be a non-negotiable for him. So there may be some things that people are not willing to negotiate about. And they need to be upfront about that as much as possible. So the last one I have is, which I haven't developed any specific writings about, but in any twosome, it's often possible that one of them is going to give in to the other one more often. And that person may be doing everything they can to, quote, keep the peace, which can backfire down the line. And so if that's happening in a relationship that you're in, that is important to really look at and acknowledge and see if you can't do something about that, both of you. So those are the themes that come up a lot with my classes.
Yeah. And I imagine also the whole theme of domestic chores, who's doing the housework, all of those kinds of things.
I left that off, didn't I?
I think, well, you didn't mention it here, but yeah. I mean, what you're touching on here is, I think this movement that we're because of the women's movement, we're in a less patriarchal age than we were 50 years ago or 70 years ago. And well, beyond that, of course.
Right.
And I think about all those traditional roles and where the family was, well, people married for economic reasons.
Right.
The family was a small business. It makes a lot of sense to name it that.
Right.
And to
of course, couples who fall in love don't want to deal with that right away, so it's an issue.
Right. That as we move away from arranged marriages into romantic love and what that means, there still is the economic investment and outlook, even just planning for your old age.
Right.
For your children's well-being, right? And so I'm very interested to hear more about that concept of a couple really with the awareness and their eyes and ears open, looking at what are they constructing and how do they build their life together.
Right. And, as Gestalt therapists who tend to work so much in the here and now, it's a little different with couples who are planning for their futures. They have to deal with the projection of how they think things are going to be in 5 years, or, if one of them is in graduate school and then then they're going to get a job, but they don't have one now. And all those issues, you have to think in terms of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important in terms of planning and organizing your little business, your little home business. But I think it does help for people to look at it as a business. It takes them out of the romantic, airy-fairy only and gets them into more practicality.
Would you say that in some ways it's the organismic self-regulation of that for that couple?
Sure.
that
Yeah,
system.
that's a good way of putting it too. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, you certainly have to bring a lot of um, of maturity to to that uh, that place, that point of view.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a different mindset than just being romantically in love, and it's moving from that place to a practical thing because you're going to live together. You may have other people involved, and I didn't even mention in-laws and parents and grandparents.
Right. How do you involve those other family connections, which certainly come up around things like vacations and holidays?
Right, right. As a side issue, I usually tell couples that I don't think visiting their parents or grandparents or children, grown children, is a vacation, and that they need to plan a vacation, for themselves or themselves individually,
Mhm,
not
mhm.
just count it as going home or
Yeah,
going back to the old situation when they grew up.
yeah. So, Cyndy, you said, and I agree with you. You said being egalitarian is not about dividing everything equally. Can you say more about that?
Well, first of all, two people in a relationship often don't make the same amount of money. So the dividing things equally, one of them may not even be working for money. They may be working, taking care of the children or working at home in some manner. But so it's impossible to divide economically, usually. Um, and in other ways too. I mean, like, let's say that one person in the couple is better at working with kids. So that person might have more things to do with raising the children than the other, et cetera, et cetera. So it may have to do with what they're better at, what their
Mhm,
skill
mhm,
sets are. Um, so it has to be sort of in a sense of goodwill between the two people.
mhm.
Um, it's interesting. The word goodwill is so ill-defined, but we all probably know what that means. I
Yeah.
remember hearing Fritz use that. I heard him kick somebody out of a group one time because he didn't think the person had goodwill.
Uh-huh.
And it was really interesting for me in retrospect to think about that. And
Mm,
that two people have to have goodwill in a relationship. And if this is kind of hard to explain, but a lot of these items that I've listed, um, if people are able to be clear and direct with each other about their opinions about these things and their desires, that takes care of a whole lot of areas where there could be misunderstandings and trouble between two people. I also make a big issue of that if after living with the new organizational decisions you've made for a while and you find that some aren't working so well, but you're still doing them, but you don't want to be doing them, it's real important to say that you can bring them up as not agreeing with it anymore or wanting to change it
mhm.
and to try to find another solution. That
Yeah.
is part of why you have the house meetings once in a while.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that,
I think of that, that are you willing to meet at the boundary? Are you willing to come put yourself at the boundary, at your contact boundary, and say, this is who I am, or this is what I need, or I feel differently about this now than I used to. Um,
Right.
that's uh,
That's
difficult for people often to do.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
They could do that. They wouldn't need to come see us.
Right.
You know.
Right. That piece of being able to as the as a new gestalt emerges throughout the marriage, which it's inevitable over you're together over a lifetime, and over, very, for couples who have children, over so many different developmental stages, not just your own developmental stages, but the developmental stages of the children, so that gestalts are forming and reforming and going from the foreground to the background and background to foreground.
Right.
And so we have to be able to um, bring that ability to check in with one another and remain contactful and present and authentic.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's another issue that came up when you were talking about blended families. When
Oh,
you have
yeah. Yeah.
two divorced people getting together with kids from both sides, and sometimes you have them all living together, and sometimes they live part-time with the other parent. And that creates a lot of issues also in a family structure and in this kind of moving, flexible system that is constantly moving and changing. And I found out that in many, many cases, uh, a lot of the people will say, well, you're the stepfather or the stepmother, and you have no say in my kids' uh, affairs. So I'm the parent of my kids, and you can be the parent of yours. And so that they're at odds
Mm-hmm.
in this, if they're both living together with two sets of kids, And I often encourage families to try to, as long as the stepfather and the stepmother are living in the house, they're affected by the other person's kids and so forth and so on, and the kids are affected by them, so that there needs to be some way they can work together and
Yeah.
have a role in the children's behavior or emotional life or whatever.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's a tough one to deal with. I'm sure you've worked with blended families.
A lot. I live in a blended family. Well, in a family where I have stepchildren, and my husband and I have our daughter that we had together,
Right.
um, and uh, there were many challenges um, around that. I came into that marriage when my stepdaughters were, one had just graduated from high school and the other was about, near the end of her high school years.
Uh-huh. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very challenging. I'm thinking there is a Gestalt therapist who's written a couple of books about blended families and step families, and her name is at the tip of my tongue, but not quite there right now.
I don't know.
Yeah, some important work around that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, my hope is, Chris, that anybody watching these videos who's into Gestalt therapy and doing Gestalt therapy, or a client in Gestalt therapy who wants to take these ideas and expand them and write more about them and encourage more development of these ideas, I think it would be wonderful. They don't
Mhm.
belong to me, they belong to all of us. And so I'm encouraging that information to spread.
Yeah, I think this is very important work, Cyndy, in people's lives. I've come across some clients who do practice kind of team meetings, uh, um, and do approach that, you know, in the same way that you might in a project management kind of approach,
Mhm.
um, and not the same way that man did who wrote the book long ago with this efficiency expert. It was kind of a novel or comedy, efficiency expert father who timed the showers and all these other things.
I
But
think I
cheaper
remember,
by the
vaguely
dozen or
remember.
something like that, right? but but yeah, who really, you know, work together to support one another on how do we accomplish, how do we maintain our home if they own a home, how do we, you know, get our kids dressed and out to school every day, how do we support ourselves in our careers or education, you know, all of these kinds of things, or you
Mhm.
know, how do we, you know, really taking an active role rather than a passive role. um, I mean, I guess that, you know, that's um, a bias that can be questioned too, but to be aware. And this reminds me of a question I wanted to ask you before also, which is, yeah, you may want to delegate one person who has better skills to do something, but that you're doing that overtly and by choice,
Mhm.
right? Not just falling into that
Right,
pattern,
right.
right?
Yeah. It's a conscious, aware choice. And it might be that two people have the same skills. And so, you know, you might trade off after a while, or you might not do either. Maybe you've got an adult child in the house who could learn it. You know,
Mm,
you could have a lot of different reasons for why you choose
yeah,
different things.
yeah.
And there are a lot of jobs that people don't want to do, nobody wants to do. So
Right, right. That
I'm really
just have
skilled
to
at
get
taking
done.
out the garbage.
Right, right.
So,
I think about my own marriage, and many other clients I've had, or couples that I've known, who are married but don't live together.
uh-huh.
And then other couples that I know who are no longer married but do still live together, or do still provide a lot of um, support. And I'm not talking about financial support, but
Uh-huh.
support to each other in their lives, maybe transportation to medical appointments, or, you know, it seems that there are, well, of course, there are an infinite number of ways that any of these things can be um, uh, uh, that uh, painted, you
Mhm.
know, and put on the canvas of how do you want to um, build your life together and live your life and uh, uh, create a family and carry out your family.
Right. Right. Mm. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to bring up for today, Chris. I don't know if you've got any more questions.
I want to look at my notes here and see if
Okay.
there's something that I haven't yet uh, mentioned that caught my eye. If I can read my notes here. Oh, I think about, you talked about jobs, Cyndy, and you talked about traveling. One of the things I think about too, and I wonder if it's come up and where you are with this around people take. Sometimes one person has a very stressful and demanding job,
Right.
and what that, um, what do you recommend, or how do you recommend people deal with that?
I don't have, a pat answer, but I certainly think that, if I'm thinking about, some of the nurses and technicians that are working in hospitals now with COVID
Yeah.
and the incredible stress that these people are experiencing, and who come home and may want to do nothing but go sleep, and that there's got to be a sense of goodwill in the family system so that they can make space for that person to get their needs met as much as possible during this crisis. Um, it's like somebody graduating from school. The end of the year is a lot of stress, or certain kinds of jobs is very stressful. So I think that has to go with the flexibility issue.
Mhm.
How can we be more flexible in our system?
And yeah, and I think it brings, I'm glad to hear you use the word goodwill again. It brings up, I think, that idea of, well, what are our values? Why are we, now I've used the word why in a Gestalt setting here, but what are we, what are our goals? What do we want for ourselves? What do we need? What do we think we should be doing versus what do we want to do? What is important to us? How do we want to get there? And to have the flexibility and the ability to, openness and willingness to take risk, to talk with one another, and reevaluate, reassess. This is what we thought we wanted. Are we willing to make this investment of our energy and time? What's the toll that it takes? Is this, for how long? And as you say, this is an experiment. We can reassess.
Right, right.
To have awareness about what we're doing, to look at it with awareness, with contact.
I don't know if this
Yeah.
is true for you, Chris, but in my practice over the years, there have always been a number of people that cannot expand their awareness, or they cannot expand their belief systems or be open to new ideas, that they stay in a very kind of rigid, static place, and which makes it very hard. And
Yeah.
so focusing on the whole idea of flexibility by itself might be an important theme, for people to become more aware of, without being so flexible that you sort of merge with the universe and become confluent with them, but just having that ability to stretch and come back and stretch and come back, and would make a big difference. Sometimes I think it's even related to people's horoscope.
I think there are, so many different factors, beyond, what the perspective that we bring as psychotherapists,
Yeah,
to, to this world that we live in.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is all I had in my notes.
Okay.
For now, I really appreciate this addition to what you said before,
Well, I figured
about.
I might as well say a little bit and not just rely on my book, because my book is also kind of outdated a little bit now. So the list I gave you is more recent.
Well, and your book, as I looked at your book again today, I'm noticing how much your book also it describes the influences that you bring to your work. Um, yeah, and is a bit of a memoir too.
Hmm.
Those early chapters, those beginning chapters about who you are and and who you are as a person that influences your work and your application of Gestalt therapy.
I didn't hear that. What?
Your application of Gestalt therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I'll stop our recording.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, very good
You
to sit with you.
participated so much this time too.
Thank you.